Hello everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this conference. I'm very happy to be able to talk about the needs of creatine and the nutrition of athletes. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to be there in person because we will be playing in the Champions League with our team in Brugge. So that's why we've taped this talk in advance. I will show you my email address and different ways of contacting me, different possibilities of contacting me in the end of this talk, so feel free to ask any questions later on by emailing me. I will try to answer all questions. Just quickly to introduce myself because I will not be there in person. My name is Robert Marshall. I'm the team doctor of RB Leipzig. I finished my medicine studies in 2009 in Hamburg, doing 2 years of research at the Institute of Biomechanics and Osteology. So doing bone research from 2010 to 2012. In 2012 we founded an institute for sports medicine, taking care of the Hamburg Sportverein, the oldest football club in Germany and the longest member of the Bundesliga back then. I was in charge of the Youth Academy for 7 years, from 2012 to 2018, and in between actually being the substitute team doctor of the first team as well. In 2018 I transferred to Leipzig, being the head of the medical department there. I actually did also do a second master study in micronutrition and regenerative medicine, actually implementing our preventive system and preventive idea into our way of treating the patients, and creatine is part of this specific concept. Now, if we consider athletes, we always have a certain balance between the capacities and resources and the stress. So there is a really nice paper by Philip Maffetone from 2016 showing this disbalance of inappropriate volume of high intensity training and competition and inappropriate nutrition. So you can call it intrinsic stress and external stress. So this is something that we have to cope with in athletic sports and in professional sports, and that's what we always have to think about I basically changed a little this image and created my own diagram, clearly making a better understanding for the balance of stress and resources. So any kind of increase in stress while the resources stay the same will induce disease and injuries, whereas if we at the same time increase our resources, we can also cope with higher amounts of stress. So in professional sports, our aim always has to be to increase the resources and our reserves to be better able to cope with increased stress. That could be training loads, it could be high amount of matches, game time, and so on. Throughout the career of a player, of an athlete, we always have this fighting of prevention against competition. Now you can think of it like on the side of the preventive way of dealing with athletes. We have science, schooling of team members, dealing with load management, dealing with regeneration, changing the living habits, and we have the possibility of thinking in terms of the cytolytic analysis. On the other hand, we have mental stress, changed intensity of the training, we have increased match loading, we have increased career length of the athletes, because usually the players have been scouted much earlier. Medicine has increased, but this is not only positive but also negative. So we have more players actually starting a professional career in soccer and other professional sports because medicine made it possible. So actually we have players who from the start have might be talented but don't bring in the medical and athletic reserve that they should need. So we always have to try and increase the preventive measures. This could be, and one of the really strength of the preventive measurements can be micronutrition and nutrition and supplements. So if you look at it, this nutrition and micronutrition and nutritional supplements can actually influence sleep. It can influence energy and how that energy is being used by the athlete. It can influence stress, it can influence immunity, and it can influence the mitochondria. So the direct energy of the players. So as you can clearly see with nutrition and micronutrition, we can really have a big impact on the athlete's performance. And that's actually why we're all here talking about all these different aspects of nutrition in the athlete's development, because we know of the importance. Now, before I go into creatine, I want to go into the aspects of supplements very quickly. So we have this aspect of energy and energy needs, specifically in soccer, which I'm working at. So we can see here that the weekly energy needs, or the weekly energy expenditure in soccer players, is usually that the player uses more energy than the body, or that he actually has an intake. So only in regenerative times, where he has a regenerative day or a down day, what we call it, we can actually put more energy into the body than he uses up. The normal day, intensive training, heavy training, match days, he or she will need more energy than we can fill up. Here again, this is a work from 2019 from Mr. Steffel, and was compared what the macronutrition intakes are and what the proposed macronutrition should be like. And as we can see, proteins and fat are being taken in the way that it's supposed. So proteins, it's suggested and advised that we take in between 1.4 and 2.0 grams per kilograms body weight, whereas fat should be accounted for about 25 to 35% of the total energy intake. But we can see that carbohydrates are usually not taken or ingested in the amount that it's supposed to be. So the proposed amount of carbs are around 8 to 12 grams per kilograms body weight, whereas we are around 4.7 to 5.7 grams per kilogram body weight. So in about more or less 50 to 60% of where we are supposed to be. Now, why is this of importance? If we have a look at the energy expenditure or the building of energy in the human body is ATP. So it is either being produced by glucose, fatty acids, or proteins. Glucose we need for anaerobic energy, and glucose is being created by carbs, whereas fatty acids, proteins, and parts of the glucose, the Krebs cycle, is being used in aerobic energy. Now, what does this exactly mean? If we have a look at it, the fastest energy in our body is ATP and creatine phosphate, so-called energetic phosphates. So in the moment we need energy, we use this up. Then the second fastest is anaerobic glucolysis. So glucagon is being used up, it's being transformed into lactate, and eventually 2 ATP is being produced. Under aerobic conditions, we have a so-called aerobic glycolysis, where glucose, with the help of insulin and the GLUT4 transporter, is being transferred into the Krebs cycle, and 38 ATP are being created or being produced. And the highest energy producing process, but at the same time the slowest one, is the fatty acid oxidation, eventually leading to 106 ATP. So you can see that ATP and creatine phosphate are the fastest energy resources, but they are the smallest, and they give us the least energy, but the fastest. However, the regeneration of ATP from ADP by creatine phosphate is 40 times faster than in the respiratory chain in the Krebs cycle, and 10 times faster than through glucolysis. So, as I said, it's the fastest way to gain energy. Now, if we look at the energy demands in a soccer match, we can see that usually in match or in modified games, we have a very high amount of actions that are above the lactate threshold, so a high amount of anaerobic energy demands. And Banksbo in 2007 analyzed that elite soccer players perform 150 to 250 brief, intense actions during a game. So this shows us that the energy needs for soccer and other team sports is in a very high anaerobic area. Now, this specific intense mixed anaerobic energy needs explain the needs of a higher carb macronutrition in team sports, specifically in soccer players. As we can see, glycogen resources or stores are being used up during a match. So right after a game, we have the depletion of glycogen resources by about 60% being built within the next 1.5 to 2 days. Glycogen is stored in the liver with about 150 grams, and in our muscles by about 1% of our body weight. So that's about 300 grams in untrained athletes or 600 grams in trained individuals, which really depends on the nutrition and the training status. So this is what we try to influence. So for soccer players, for team sports, we have two most important energy stores, which are the energetic phosphates, ATP and creatine phosphate, and we have glycogen. Now, if we look at it again, we can see ATP and glycogen is the energy that's mainly being used within the first more or less 2 minutes of high intensity, which is basically the energy need that is being needed in team sports. And in between those explosive, intense actions, the body restores ATP and creatine phosphate in those moments of lower intensity. So we can summarize that creatine and phosphocreatine, as well as the creatine kinase, are the dominant factors in explosive energy needs. The mitochondrium is the production side of ATP, so that's the battery in the human body. Mitochondrial CK channeling phosphates into the cytosol via phosphate or creatine phosphate. In the cytosol, ATP is being resynthesized by cytosolic creatine kinase. And we can see that creatine phosphate has a reduction in concentration in the cytosol by about 25 to 60% during intense exercises. So this is kind of similar to what we can see with glycogen stores. So phosphocreatine and glycogen is being used up at the same time in high intensity training and high intensity actions. So it is really important to have creatine phosphate being at very high stores and levels within the body. Now, there have been many resources and questionnaires of the use of supplements and medications in professional sports, and just shown here a couple of different papers, basically all agreeing that there's about 66% prevalence in the use of supplements, meaning that athletes roundabout have 2 medications a day and 3 supplements a day in average. Now, why do athletes take supplements? Now, it can be divided in 5 basic major needs. So the first goal is improving general body function, like increasing muscle mass, inducing fat loss, and improving the joint and bone function. The second is improving the energy availability, meaning the increasing of the glycogen resynthesis, faster carbohydrate availability, and a better fat oxidation. And additionally, improving body reactions like the neurostimulation, strengthening the immune status, enhancing blood flow, lowering gastrointestinal stress. Also, the goal for food supplements is improving the muscle function, meaning reducing muscle damage, reducing muscle cramps, and increasing regeneration. And lastly, improving mitochondrial function, so optimizing oxygen uptake, energy storage, and optimizing the antioxidant capacity. And this is where creatine kicks in. This is where creatine is needed. So as you can see, there's a high prevalence of intakes in creatine. Here it is being said between 8 to 14%. Others actually go up to 30 to 40% in specific athletes. So there have been many works regarding the evidence for food supplements. Here just a quick table. Green, you can see on the left, seeing a strong evidence for a real impact on athletic performance. Amber is a moderate evidence, whereas red is there is no evidence or it's prohibited. And you can see that for strength, especially for strength training and strength performance, creatine is, next to protein, the best evidence for food supplements. So what do we know about creatine? Creatine is produced in the body or naturally ingested via meat. So it is it is less produced or less seen in vegetarians or vegans. About 4 million kilograms of creatine are annually being used in the USA. As said, the prevalence of creatine intake is around 15 to 40%, really depending on the questionnaire and the athletes being asked. It's one of the best research dietary supplements in the world, and it's being produced mainly in China and to a less amount in Germany. Food supplements are great markets, as you can see, with 70 to 100 billion US dollars that actually are being made by the sales of supplements. Now this talk is about creatine, and creatine has been shown not only to help athletes, but to a much greater extent help in several different diseases. So it has been shown that it can help with arthritic diseases, spinal cord injuries, as I said, recovery from allergies, but also COPD, heart failure, mitochondrial cytopathies, muscle diseases, acute injuries, immobilizations, and to a lesser extent to neurodegenerative diseases. But this talk is about athletes. So, just for you to give it an understanding, how is creatine being produced? So, creatine is built out of arginine and glycine in the kidneys, blood, and liver, with the help of methionine eventually being an amino compound that is called creatine, with the help of vitamin B, folic acid, choline, histidine, and tryptophan. About 30% of the creatine in the human body is present as creatine, whereas 2/3 are being stored as creatine phosphate. 95% are being stored in muscles, 5% in brain, liver and kidney, less in nerve cells in the eyes and ears. Creatine could be called a phosphate transport and antioxidant. Phosphocreatine is more likely to be the energy storage for short-term energy needs, regenerating ADP to ATP. It has a buffer function to maintain short-term ATP changes, and you can find more creatine and creatine phosphate in fast-twitch muscle fibers type 2. The endogenous synthesis is about 1 to 2 grams daily, and the breakdown and excretion lies about 1.5 to 3 grams. So there is a daily requirement of about 2 to 4 grams per day, which is being ingested by mainly red meat. If this is not our everyday food source, it should be supplemented as a food supplement. Now this is again just an overview what and where creatine is being used. So we use it in the mitochondria, we use it in the cytosol, and we use it for the ATPase. And it's being used to buffer energy needs and to build up energy in explosive needs. How does creatine help in sports? Now, if we have a look at this, it shows us that creatine increases the protein synthesis by increasing the insulin growth factor, it activates satellite cells and it decreases myostatin, which is the counter agent of protein synthesis. It helps us to increase exercise capacity, and it protects us from protein breakdown. Now, how does training affect our genetic and cellular mechanisms? Now, endurance training, so training with moderate intensity for a longer time than 30 minutes, leads to development of type 1 slow-twitching fibers via inducing a calcium gradient. It activates the transcription factor NF-ATC1 via calcineurin, which translocates into the nucleus and induces the production of slow fiber genes. Strength training, on the other hand, activates the development of type 2 fibers, fast-twitching fibers, via the mTOR pathway through mechanic loading. It uses protein synthesis required for the regeneration of sarcomeres after eccentric loading and the hypertrophy of type 2 fibers. The mTOR signaling pathway is also being induced directly or activated directly by the supplementation or the availability of free amino acids. That's why the supplementation of amino acids are so essential for the development of muscles and strength. Now, this is another really interesting figure on the effect of delayed muscle soreness on muscle hypertrophy after eccentric exercises. So you can see that phagocytic macrophages immigrate into the cell, produce COX and PGE as a controlled protein synthesis and controlled inflammation, which induces the swelling of myocytes and eventually the releasing of insulin-like growth factors, which leads to supercompensation, hypertrophy, and activation and immigration of stem cells. Now here again, to even more detailed extent, I'm showing you on how endurance training and strength training lead to the activation of satellite cells. How do nutritional supplements affect strength and muscle mass? Now, we know about the beneficial effects of creatine, amino acids like essential amino acids, omega-3 and vitamin D, like it's shown here, through the activation of the mTOR pathway or the reduction of inflammation, therefore reducing the damaging effects. On the same time, we know about the detrimental effects of omega-6, so inflammation inducing fatty acids, NSAIDs and COX inhibitors, and glucocorticoids. How does creatine have anabolic effects? Now, it increases the protein synthesis through the enhancement of the anabolic pathways mTOR and EGF. It improves the muscle glycogen storage via the activation and translocation of the GLUT4, the insulin-dependent transporter, through the swelling of the myocyte, the same that we have at the reaction on DOMS. There is an activation of osmosensing genes that induce cytoskeleton remodeling and protein synthesis. We have the upregulation of stem cell activating genes, ERK, MAP, and PAX, and we have a better nucleosomal cell protection that protect the cell from apoptosis. So altogether, it leads to an altered gene environment that ultimately leads to improving athletic performance and the results to strength and explosive training. So let me summarize this. The creatine's anabolic effects on sports are the increase in the water content in the muscle, the stimulation of the protein synthesis, the stimulation of anabolic hormones, the decrease of cortisol levels, the decrease of myostatin, the decrease of muscle damage and inflammation, an improved glycogen storage, the lower lactate increase, probably to a lesser extent a lower decrease in muscle mass after injuries, so in the rehabilitative process, and creatine has a strong antioxidant effect. Therefore, it is understandable that creatine has a great effect on athletic performance. It's been shown to improve the results in middle distance running, jumping strength, sprinting ability, strength training like bench press, squatting, leg press. There have been many sports shown to have better athletic results whenever we have a need of short-term explosive energy needs. So there, creatine has a greater benefit in those sports than in endurance sports. However, creatine can do much more. Creatine can also help us in energetic emergency situations. So we know that traumatic, ischemic, and anoxic conditions cause acute mitochondrial dysfunction. The intracellular calcium gradient increases after contusion and concussion, which actually leads to the apoptosis, cell apoptosis, via formation of the mitochondrial permeability transition pore. Additionally, we know that central nervous system trauma causes altered neurotransmission, so-called excitotoxicity, a word that I don't like to pronounce, neither in German nor in English. Hypoxic conditions lead to glycolytic energy status, which ultimately lead to a lactate accumulation, lowering the pH, generating oxidative radicals, damaging the mitochondria. And we know by now that the amount of hypoxia affects the infarction size, the risk, as well as the risk of a sudden cardiac death. Here, creatine has a great beneficial effect because it directly counteracts damaging cellular mechanisms. It can buffer ATP storage, as shown before. It can buffer ATP in situations of hypoxic conditions, lowering the risk of apoptosis. It can neutralize radical oxygen species through its antioxidative capacity. So it protects from inflammation and cell damage, and it's able to stabilize the calcium gradient and counteract the glutamate storm, thus protecting the mitochondria. This can be shown like this. So this is what happens in the case of an injury, contusion, or infarction. So perfusion is going down, we have a hypoxic ischemic situation and leading to a mitochondrial dysfunction, ultimately leading to apoptosis, cell damage, inflammation, or an increase in lactate. The contusion leads to an increase of calcium through glutamate, ultimately again leading to a mitochondrial dysfunction. Creatine can counteract all those different ways through different possibilities, being antioxidative, buffering the ATP status, and stabilizing the membrane, thus counteracting the calcium gradient. In this table you can see all these different actions summarized. I'm more than happy to provide you with all the needed literature and studies if you like. So creatine can improve sleep, cognition, and mood. It has been shown that under the supplementation of creatine, cognitive abilities were able to increase, especially under stressful conditions. This was independent of gender, age, and the level of activity. So it was also shown with young teenagers in school, it was shown with athletes, passing ability improved under creatine supplementation. And as I said, under stressful conditions like hypoxia, sleep deprivation, and during stressful exercises, this ability increased. So especially for teams that have high loadings, Champions League, flying to the national teams, jet lag, and so on, we have an improvement in the cognitive status. It's been hypothesized that there are possible positive effects of creatine supplementation on sleep quality and the need of sleep, as well on fatigue, and it's been proposed that it has an actual analgesic effect on the system, thus making the body not as prone to pain-provoking situations. Now, in these terms, we have to differentiate between the preventive creatine supplementation and the therapeutic creatine supplementation. So, in the preventive creatine supplementation, the idea is that acute stressors like sleep deprivation, hypoxic conditions, stress may reduce brain creatine, thus impacting brain function. And the preventive supplements raise the creatine levels to a better status before, thus not having this detrimental effect under stressful conditions. So our aim is to increase creatine levels beforehand instead of the need to increase the levels when they are depleted. Let me talk about so-called side effects of creatine. Here I have listed those who have been told in the past. As you can see, none of the side effects were actually reproduced at any time. So there has been no kidney side effects, there's no proof of cramps or dehydration in athletes, no proof of hair loss, there is no dangerous side effects in adolescents. Gastrointestinal complaints only occur at very high dosage of more than 10 grams a day, which is much higher than what we actually suggest. So it should always be taken with less than 5 grams a day, dissolved in water. Even pregnant women most likely are not endangered if they take creatine. And in teenagers, there should always be given lower dosage than with adults. So our recommendations are: use creatine monohydrate preferable from German productions, as powder or dissolved in water. It should not be heated. Not more than 2 to 3 grams daily. If you do this, there's no need to do breaks or pauses in between. It should either be taken in a fasted status in the morning or directly after training. You can either take it fasted or combined with carbohydrates or protein. It does not make much of a difference. And all genders and ages can take it. Teenagers should only take it under professional supervision. There is no need in so-called loading phases, no boostering. If you take only small amounts of 2 to 2 grams a day, there is no need for breaks of the supplementation. However, what we do not know yet is if there is a difference of the different creatine isoforms in therapeutical and medical situations, like in the need for the usage for psychiatric disorders, cardiac disorders, neurological disorders, and at the same time we do not know if the 2 to 3 grams daily help under specific medical conditions. But we know that 2 to 3 grams for athletes are absolutely fine. You don't need to take any more, and it's really, really helpful under all the things that I've summarized so far. So if you have a look at this picture, it shows you what creatine actually affects, and it's much more than only strength. So let me summarize this once more. For athletes, creatine can actually help in so many different modalities. It is the most important molecule for explosive energy needs. It can help to optimize athletic training and regeneration through inducing anabolic genetic pathways. It's capable of buffering anaerobic conditions and protecting mitochondria, which are the main batteries of the human system. Creatine protects our myocytes, thus reducing the risk for cardiac arrhythmias, thus reducing the risk of a sudden cardiac arrest. It protects our central nervous system after mild traumatic injuries via stabilizing the neurotransmitters. It improves cognition under stressful conditions. It reduces the need of sleep and fatigue symptoms. It may even help as an energetic agent and has a positive influence on mood. So as you can see, creatine is a supplement that is not expensive, that has nearly no side effects, and has a great effect on athletes' performance for several reasons under medical and athletic perspectives. So thank you for listening. I'm very sorry not to be there in person, but I'm very happy for any contact and any question that might arise and that you might send to me. Take care, enjoy the summit, enjoy the conference, and we'll be more than happy to join in the next time. Bye bye, take care, keeping the fingers crossed, hopefully you're winning in Brugg.